So yoga very much has a culture that is traditional. And that culture goes back to pranayama and meditation and the yamas and the niyamas and the yoga sutras and all that. And when we think about traditional yoga, it's really the philosophy of yoga that's traditional. And the movement is modern. Yoga is modern. If you read through the Hatha Yoga Pradipika or the Shiva Samhita or the Garunda Samhita or these ancient books that talk about asana, talk about postures, very little of it reflects what we see in a yoga class now. Spirituality is a word like any other word, so we all have our own definition of it. For me, my definition of spirituality is the quest to understand the truth. And I think the truth, as I've mentioned quite a few times, is that we're whole. All of us are whole. We came into this world whole, without needing anything, without lacking anything, and we'll leave it going back to the whole. I think the important thing with meditation is just like anything else. It's a tool that brings you somewhere. So just like working out or doing anything that's physical, you have a goal, whatever that is. Maybe if you're a weightlifter and you're doing chest day, your goal is to build the chest bigger. And so you do exercises that goes towards that. Meditation is the same thing. It's a tool. So if you have a goal, it's going to help you out. It gives you the intention rather than just sitting down and, okay, I'm just going to do this type of meditation. If you don't know what you're using that for, it's going to be less effective because there's not a direction that it's going.
So my guest today is Dylan Werner, and he's one of the most recognized yoga teachers in the world. And I've been doing sports for most of my life. I've been doing yoga for a couple of years. I tried a couple of different schools and different practices, but Dylan takes his yoga practice into a whole new level. And he's not only extremely fit and skilled in all the physical aspects of yoga, but he's also very knowledgeable about science behind these practices, physiology, history, philosophy of yoga. And on top of that, he's just a nice person to talk to. And he has a lot of knowledge about Eastern philosophy, and he shares a lot of this knowledge and his own wisdom in this interview. So apart from talking about yoga in general, we discussed things like breathwork, importance of setting intentions in yoga practice and in life, how to be more present and why is it important, how to be more disciplined and how to build discipline in general, and many other fascinating topics. So if you are into yoga, this is a must-watch episode of Truth Theory podcast. If you are considering to learn a little bit more about yoga, maybe you want to start your practice, you should check it out as well. And if you just want to improve yourself, have more perspective on life, learn about how to live and become a better human being, I think this episode will be good for you as well. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, this is Dylan Werner. All right, so this is Mike Sigula from truththeory.com, and this is Truth Theory Podcast episode 12. And my guest today is Dylan Werner. Dylan is a former paramedic and firefighter turned yoga instructor. He's considered one of the top yoga teachers in the world. In recent years, Dylan has been traveling full-time and teaching all around the world in more than 60 countries. He has given hundreds of workshops and participated in countless retreats, and he has close to 1 million followers on social media. So, Dylan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for joining me. I've been keeping an eye on your Instagram for like at least 2 years. And, when I came across your content, I was thinking, like, first thought was, is this guy a human? And the second thing was, how much does he train? Because, I used to do a lot of different sports myself, and it felt like, you probably do a lot of put a lot of energy into, developing your practice. And then I think I read or heard you speaking that you started doing like 3 hours a day in the first couple of years, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, my practice has changed and progressed quite a bit since when I first started. I think, well, I don't think. Before I started doing yoga, I was really into rock climbing and very consistent as a rock climber, and I would climb as many hours as my body could hold up. I had a lot of fun with it, and kind of to help with rock climbing and just to do something a little bit different. And for other various reasons, I found myself in a yoga class, and I had done yoga when I was younger, like around 2021, for a few years in martial arts. And it was like more of the movement based stuff, not so much the philosophy or anything like that. And it's kind of one of the reasons why I say I didn't start yoga until I was 29, because I didn't actually start to study the philosophy of yoga until I was 29. And yoga being this holistic practice that is mind, body, and breath. When you just started just doing the body stuff, is really essentially calisthenics, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, calisthenics is great, and I love doing that. But yoga is more of this holistic practice. So when I started into it, I, like most things that I do, I get kind of obsessed, and so my practice was about 3 hours a day. And at that time, I was a firefighter. And being a firefighter, the schedule really allowed me to dedicate a lot of time to my practice. So on my days off, which I worked a 48-96, so that's 2 days at the fire station and 4 days home. So in the 4 days home, all I had to do was really yoga and basically free time. And so I was able to take 1 or 2 classes a day plus my own personal practice. And then when I was at the fire station, anytime that we had downtime, instead of like sitting in the chairs and watching TV with the rest of the crew, I'd be in the squad bay practicing yoga for as many hours as I could. Often I had a goal of about 3 hours going into it. Now, let's see, I really started yoga almost 11 years ago now. I'm about ready to turn 40. So yeah, almost 11 years. So in that time, my practice has changed quite a bit, and how I practice. Where in the beginning it was a lot more asana and kind of like skill-based arm balance stuff. Now there's a lot more meditation, a lot more pranayama. And my asana practice is, depending on if I'm teaching. If I'm teaching a lot, then I'll do a lot more asana, because that's where I create my classes, is in my home practice. But otherwise, it's a lot more repetition, and that's kind of how I train now. It's just tons of repetition, either handstands or chaturangas or back bends or whatever it might be.
And so you basically do meditation, pranayama, some kind of breath work exercises, and physical practice. What are like the benefits of each one of those? What would you say? Because every single one of them focuses on slightly different things. So, like, for example, with meditation, what kind of meditation do you do?
My meditation practice changes often. I kind of stick to one discipline for a month or two or more. Just like if you're working out, you want to switch up your routine so that you can continue to grow. Meditation is really a way to understand yourself and the tendencies of the mind. And so if you vary that, sometimes new things come about. But generally what I practice is Vipassana or Anapanasati. Anapanasati means essentially mindfulness of the breath. So just watching the breath and noticing where the mind goes. Where Vipassana is like the body scanning. Vipassana means insight, or essentially understanding things how they are. So those are my two favorite. I do Zazen when I'm doing longer types of meditation. Zazen is a Japanese form of meditation, very old, one of the oldest forms, very strict. And that one's really good. I like to do it when I'm out in nature. So if you're out, because it's one of the few meditations that you do with your eyes open. Yeah, and then I'll vary in different types of meditation practices with that. But Yeah, I think it's always a good idea to switch it up, just to kind of to see what might arise with that. And ultimately,
Well,
with the practices, in if I'm practicing asana, there is a state of meditation because the mind is always going somewhere. It's always doing something. So I observe the tendencies. I observe what I'm feeling, what's coming up in my practice, in my struggles. If I'm not doing well, what are my tendencies with that, and how does the mind want to react? And try to come at it as a bit of an observer. And then the pranayama is it's kind of the backbone of everything, the breathing practices. So breath is hugely important in meditation. For most of my meditation practices, it's my meditation object, so where I focus. And in my asana, I'm always very mindful of what my breath is doing. In fact, even when I practice the handstands or anything that's like really kind of more rigorous, I try to practice with a mouthful of water so that I make sure that I'm breathing properly through the nose and I don't resort to mouth breathing or anything like that. So they kind of all go together. There is a lot of benefits and different ways that you could use pranayama to train different aspects of your life. So I tend to use pranayama more as a tool of how to find certain outcomes that I'm looking for, whether it's to increase energy or to become a little bit more calm or to increase my athletic performance. It's kind of, like I said, the backbone of all the practices. And that goes for when I'm rock climbing or surfing. I just came back from Portugal, and one of the things I was really aware of as I was doing a lot of paddling or surfing is how my breath was. And if I had a tendency to breathe with my mouth open, or if I was really fast or rapid, and how my breathing affect my surfing. And it was an interesting observation for sure.
have you ever tried grounding meditation? You know, when you kind of visualize roots going from your bottom of your spine, for example, and you know, like your crown chakra linked to the universe. Have you ever tried that?
Yeah, I've done lots of different types of visualization meditations like that.
Yeah, it's one of the techniques that I actually been using quite a lot in recent years. It's I don't know. After Vipassana, I get kind of more disconnected, like daydreaming a lot, and this one it kind of keeps me more sharp and clears my mind. So I was just curious if you have experience with this particular one. Like there is a bunch of variations, but yeah.
Yeah, I think the important thing with meditation is just like anything else. It's a tool that brings you somewhere. So it just like working out or doing anything that's physical, you have a goal, whatever that is. Maybe if you're a weightlifter and you're doing chest day, your goal is to build the chest bigger. And so you do exercises that goes towards that. Meditation is the same thing. It's a tool. So if you have a goal, it's going to help you out. It gives you the intention rather than just sitting down and, okay, I'm just going to do this type of meditation. If you don't know what you're using that for, it's going to be less effective because there's not a direction that it's going. And I think that's a mistake that a lot of beginner meditators have, is they just, okay, I'm supposed to meditate. This is good for me. People tell me it's good for me. So they sit down and they start meditating and they don't really understand why they're doing it. So having that intention, once you have the intention, then you could choose what type of meditation is going to work best for you for that intention.
Yeah, you also talk about before each practice, you have intention what you want to gain from particular practice, right? So how does it work? Can you give us some examples when you do just normal, you know, physical exercise or yoga? What kind of goal you want to gain from each single one? How does it work? Like maybe some examples.
Unless if it's a skill based practice, like for example, one arm handstands, then all my exercises are going to be going towards one arm handstands, whether that's working towards flexibility or balance or increasing stamina. I choose that. If I'm not doing something that's skill based, my intention is generally towards overall balance. In yoga, we talk a lot about alignment, and there's different ways to think about alignment. And it's important to understand that no approach is right or wrong, that every approach has an intention. And the only wrong approach is when the practice doesn't match the intention. There's actually, I like to play a lot of music, and I was, who was I listening to, or talking about jazz in particular. They're saying that there's no wrong notes, just playing the notes at the wrong time. And I think there's no wrong way to do anything, but if it's not fitting towards what your intention is, then it's not the appropriate practice for what you want to do. I think most yogis, when they practice, they look at the poses and they try to really go into the alignment. So like, how do I perfect the alignment in Warrior One or in Downward Facing Dog, or whatever the posture might be. And I like to look at it at a kind of a different way. It's what is this posture doing for me as far as my overall alignment? And alignment is really where you are naturally, where your body rests, your posture. So if I have too much tightness on the front side of the body, I might be pulling inwards. If I have too much tightness in the back side of the body, I might be like this. If I have some disproportionate tension or compression in rotation through like we have all these different myofascial meridians which kind of hold tension through the body, then I might be a little bit twisted, one shoulder forward or back, or my spine might have a little scoliosis, or I might have one hip that's higher than the other. And this could be from having bones that are longer or whatever it is. But because the body is held together through a system of tension and compression, it is a holistic balancing system. And we could actually create structural integration through that, structural alignment through that, through movement. And ultimately, that's what yoga does. And so when I approach a practice, I'm looking for balance. So I'm always going antagonist, agonist. So the muscles or the muscle groups that counteract each other through tension and compression, or through stretching and strength. So I would never just do a forward fold practice, or I would never just do a back bend practice, because that would leave me ultimately out of a line. I work towards balancing both those sides so that when I finish my practice, I'm balanced. Or if I'm doing rotation. So I really think about how the body works with itself, either synergistically or antagonistically. And I focus that through different myofascial meridians, which are just muscle and fascial lines of tension. And that essentially gives me an overall understanding, or kind of a blueprint of what my practice is going to be, or what the asanas or the poses that I'm going to do. And even within that, I work through the properties of fascia. So fascia has the properties of transmission of force. So if I pull one side, it affects the other side. So that works holistically through the whole body. And within that, then it has different time-dependent sorry, let me mute myself. Different time-dependent reactions to that. So it has properties of elasticity, something being able to deform and then reform. And this helps us to come back to our shape. Because if I just work flexibility through plasticity, which is basically deformation without reformation, which is what a lot of yoga works through, is this longer stretching holds, then I lose my athleticism. And that's not right or wrong. You don't need to have elasticity. It just depends on what your movement goals are. If you are a contortionist, you want to have more plasticity than elasticity. If you're a CrossFitter, you want to have almost all elasticity, or a runner, you want to have a lot of elasticity, not plasticity, because dynamic movement works off elasticity. And then I work off of other properties, such as like viscoelasticity, which has slow and fast properties. And this is how the muscles start to move and stretch, or it's called creep, where the things gradually pull apart. And I think about these things as I'm constructing my practice, and glide, how the different muscles slide across each other. Because as we live mostly sedentary lifestyles, even movers, such as yourself and myself, most of our life, if we really think about it, is quite sedentary. I'm not doing yoga 24 hours a day. At least 8 hours of that I'm sleeping. I'm in bed, and then there's other times I'm in front of my computer answering emails or watching TV or movies or whatever, or sitting down to eat or whatever it is. Like, we're mostly sedentary, as much as even the most extreme movers. If you count the hours of the day, we're sitting, and so through that time of sitting or that time of non-movement, our muscles and our fascia begins to adhere to each other. It agglomerates. It starts to get really sticky, and it doesn't move. And what creates the movement is the layers of movement is through differential movement. We're moving muscles at different rates, moving muscles across one joint in a group versus muscles across multiple joints, or you'd say monoarticulate and polyarticulate muscles. So moving these muscles at different rates creates the effect of glide. Good way to think about the muscles, like in between the muscles and is we have they're called glycosaminoglycans, which hyaluronin, heparin, all these other big words that basically their job is to bring in fluid. It's kind of like an egg yolk, or not an egg yolk, egg white, where it's like when you first break open an egg, it's really slimy, but if you let it sit there, it starts to get really sticky and tacky. And that's what our muscles do. And so to get that slipperiness, we need to start moving. So these are really the things that I'm looking towards when I'm constructing my practice. How do I create freedom of movement, and how do I create balance? That's why I know it's a big, long explanation, but that's like really just the tip of the iceberg of what I'm thinking about when it comes to movement and my movement practice.
I'm also curious, what's your view about dogmatic approach to teaching some of these ancient methods? Because I used to do Qigong for 3 years, for example. I was training in London with a Chinese guy, who was considered this great master of Tai Chi. And my approach was, he would tell us what to do, and I would be always curious, why do we do certain things in specific ways? Because then I would go to a different class and the teacher would tell you something completely different, do this position in a different way. And he would never tell us why specific approach, the approach he was using, what was the mechanism behind it, like he would just tell you, do what I tell you because, I'm the master. So, I think you talk about this stuff, how everything evolves, right? So, and these practices are all created by humans, and then in a way you need to adapt, you need to experiment to make things better, to make things more appropriate for different types of people, for different circumstances. Do you see a lot of this kind of approach in yoga, like the dogmatic, way of teaching, like this is exactly how you have to do things, and because whatever, someone else was teaching me this way? What's your kind of view about this whole thing?
When I started into yoga felt very dogmatic to me. And as a beginner, you don't tend to ask so many questions because it's all so new. So you're trying to figure out, what is it that I'm supposed to be doing, and the why isn't really there. As I teach, and as I teach my students to become teachers and also teach, I tell them the why, or the intention, is the most important thing. And so if you give an alignment cue, like let's say reach the arms up overhead, or bring the shoulders up towards the ears, or bring the shoulders away from the ears, there's an intention behind why you do that. And if you don't understand that intention, then you shouldn't be giving that cue. Yoga is full of dogma, that things should be this way because whoever taught it like this. And it kind of goes back culturally. You have a guru and you don't question your guru. I don't believe that. I'm not a guru worshiper. I do respect gurus, especially the ones that are really filled with knowledge and stuff. But a true teacher, first of all, the word guru means remover of darkness. And ultimately, what what a teacher should do is to enlighten you or bring light upon, is to reveal the truth of what's going on. And if a teacher is telling you to do something without telling you what's going on, then they're not doing their job as a teacher. We the way that I teach, because I love Qigong. I've been practicing Qigong for about 11 years. I still don't really understand it. I'd say the most I understand about Qigong is that your energy goes where the intention goes. And
Mhm.
and that's an important part of understanding it. I mean, I know the different types of practices, but I'm not a Qigong teacher because I don't understand the deeper levels behind it. But with yoga, I do, or at least I think I do at this point. As we grow and we learn, we think we know, and then as we look back, we realize that we don't. But at this point, I kind of feel like I understand what's going on, especially physically, what's happening through the body, and the body is pretty simple to understand as far as the movement goes, because it's all the muscles, they attach one bone to another, kind of. That's not really a great definition, but they work to articulate the joints. And so you can see where one muscle goes to one attachment, and then to another, or the origin and the insertion, and you could see how it pulls together and how they work together, and then how they work together through a full line, and how that creates tension or strength. And so using that understanding of anatomy, I could tell a student, let's say if we're talking about Wild Thing. Well, Wild Thing is kind of one of these postures. It's a little bit of a back bend. It's a little bit of a twist. It's a little bit of a side bend. And it's not really good at any of these things, but it kind of works through all of them. So if I have a specific intention in the class, let's say I'm wanting to work through the lateral line, which is working down the intercostals, obliques, down the side of the leg, then I could actually understand what I want to do with the body to tune it. And so I work through a system that I call myofascial tuning, which is just like if you tune a guitar by turning the machine head or the tuning knob at the top, you can make the string tighter or looser. And ultimately, when we're looking for balance in the body, if I'm looking to balance the right side or the left side, I'm looking to make one side tighter or looser, or both that way, so that I have this balance of tension and compression through that. So I could say, okay, lateral line, well, if I externally rotate my arm, I'm going to get more latissimus dorsi. And latissimus dorsi is going to go down to the opposite glute, or contralaterally. And so that's going to work through the functional line, which is a different line of tension and compression. But I want the lateral line, so I want to actually remove latissimus dorsi out of that, so I can get more into the intercostals and to the obliques. So I'm going to say internal rotation. And having this understanding of anatomy and this understanding of movement, anything that I say with the hands or the feet or the arms, I understand what the effect is. And so there's a cause and effect through movement. And that gives me the alignment of the posture. Because my ultimate goal is alignment, overall holistic alignment or postural alignment, it's really easy to understand what I want the pose to do, not working towards a shape. Anytime you work towards creating a shape, unless it's for aesthetic purposes, like in arm balancing, it's dogmatic. In hand balancing, I approach it completely different, because hand balancing is a performance sport. It's different than yoga. Yoga is about working on the inside and creating a holistic balance to the body, where hand balancing it's about creating an aesthetic beauty that people could admire. And also, I mean, for me, hand balancing does the same thing that yoga does, but I might approach it a little bit different, because I'm looking towards creating these pretty shapes. And there's nothing wrong with that. We just have to understand, what is my intention through this? And once you have that, the dogma essentially goes away.
Mhm. Why do you think, when we go to a yoga studio, we see so many women, and the proportions are often like 90% women and 10% guys? I don't know if this is something you've encountered, but whenever I go, like I've been traveling and checking different places, and normally, there's like me and like two other guys maximum doing yoga. Why do you think, you know, guys are not so attracted to it. It's such a great practice, and it creates so many benefits. What do you think? It's the reason?
It goes into the dogma of what the perception of what yoga is and what it's supposed to do. And I've been, since I started teaching yoga, I've been trying to change his perception. And I think, as being the type of teacher that I am and the way that my social media looks, or whatever, I tend to attract a lot more men. So my classes are generally more men than most classes I go to. But when I go to like a different country and I show up, then yeah, I see the same thing. It's predominantly women, but I don't know. It has changed. It has changed definitely a lot since I started practicing, the amount of men going into it. And in LA, there are certain places, LA, maybe Singapore, uh, London as well. I think there's a lot more men in these bigger cities, and it depends on the teacher and the community, because uh, one of the things with yoga is about community. It's called the sangha. Sangha means community, and one of the reasons that I love yoga, and especially being someone that travels around all the time, is I could show up and be a part of that community. So if that community welcomes men into it, there's going to be a lot more men in the class. And if you're in a place where yoga is still considered feminine, then men tend to stay away from that because they don't want to be associated with that. So I don't know, because like when I started, I was 20, 21 years old in the Marine Corps, and I was wrestling for the All Marine team, and I was going to martial arts, and it was through martial arts that I was introduced to yoga. And in my martial arts class, it was only men. There was not a single female in there. And so for me, like, yoga was very masculine. And the first studio that I went to after that, after doing yoga and martial arts, was from one of the instructors, who was a 4th-degree black belt, and also a yogi, opened a yoga studio. And he was a Brian Kest power yoga teacher. And so that yoga studio I went to was full of men. And this is in Southern California. So I didn't really even notice that division between men and women until I started traveling more. But yeah, it's community. It changes from place to place, and I think it'll continue to grow. Yoga has grown tremendously around the world, and it's still new in some places, which is surprising, because this is it's an ancient practice, but it's changing. And also the way people are practicing it is changing a lot. It's becoming less dogmatic, less having to be these whatever quote unquote traditional postures. And now I'm seeing people add in more like calisthenic type things, or more explosive things, or just different types of movement that we wouldn't normally just associate with what asana practice is. And I think as we move into different forms of movement, it's going to attract more people. But if we keep it just slow stretching and easy postures, then I think more women are going to be attracted to that, because it's more for their body type. And that's also kind of a slightly dogmatic viewpoint, and I don't even know if I fully agree with that, my own statement that I just said, but who knows.
And if you compare what you see today when you go to a modern yoga studio, and actually how yoga used to look like, throughout the history, because obviously you studied that, what are the differences? Like, today we have some kind of hybrid version of actually what, yoga used to be like. Because I felt like this stuff is hundreds of years old, and then I heard that a lot of these things were coming. Some postures come from gymnastics and other things, right?
Yeah, if we look at the history of yoga, I think this is the big misconception, because we're like, okay, yoga is this 5,000-year-old practice, and it is. And if you go back to the Bhagavad Gita, or the Mahabharata, where they're talking about yoga, or the Upanishads. Like there's mentions of yoga all through this, but very little of it is actually mentioning asana. Asana really became important in yoga, or more important around the turn of the century, with the English coming in and occupying India. And this was something that India had, because the English were really big into bodybuilding and all these things. And yoga was something that the Indians had that had a physicality to it and was unique to them. And so they started to adapt things from Swedish gymnastics and from stuff from the Danes, and stuff in bodybuilding from the English, and the Surya Namaskar, which is essentially like a slowed down version of burpees or bodybuilding, and started adding this together. And then you had Krishnamacharya and Pattabhi Jois and Iyengar creating this much more physical form of yoga, and then spreading it out to the West. And so what we think of traditional yoga is modern yoga. Because I'm from the United States, and the United States is only a couple hundred years old. And I would say that the US really doesn't have a tradition, versus where I'm right now in the Czech Republic, and I'm in Prague, which is a city that has buildings that are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years old, and this and the city has thousands of years of history and tradition, and the Italian, and there's culture here. So yoga very much has a culture that is traditional. And that culture goes back to pranayama and meditation, and the yamas and the niyamas and the yoga sutras and all that. And when we think about traditional yoga, it's really the philosophy of yoga that's traditional, and the movement is modern. Yoga is modern. If you read through the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, or the Shiva Samhita, or the Garunda Samhita, or these ancient books that talk about asana, talk about postures, very little of it reflects what we see in a yoga class now. And I think that's okay, because like everything changes and evolves. This is what we know. Change is the universal force of nature. It's the universal truth. Everything is undergoing change. Nothing stays the same. And if something doesn't grow and change with the times, it essentially dies. And yoga is something that has, for thousands of years, has evolved. And we've seen, really in the last 120 years or so, we've seen this evolution of the movement of yoga. And that's important. And even now it's speeding up. And as it grows and becomes more for the masses, we're going to see the movement part of it change even more. What we need to be aware of, or at least open to, is, are we having resistance to this change? Because anytime that you resist change, you create some sort of suffering, or you create you essentially block the flow. And we need to make sure that yoga is changing, but also direct how it's changing, that we don't lose the culture. We don't lose the aspects that fundamentally make things yoga. And ultimately, yoga is a practice that brings us to being whole. Whole meaning mind, body, spirit, breath. And it's one of the few practices that we really look at the holistic body, versus a lot of other movement practices, which really just look at the movement part of it. And as long as we keep that understanding of that yoga is about the whole, and even deeper into the philosophy, that when we understand that we're whole, we realize that there's no separation. And another huge part of yoga is the alleviation of suffering, which comes through the understanding of truth, that we're not separate, but we're connected. We might be different, but there's a big difference between different and separate. And so this is to me what yoga is. Everybody has their own definition of it, which is fine, because we create our own meaning. Every word that we say has its meaning. And as long as you understand that it's okay for other people to have their own meaning to it and their own growth, my understanding of what yoga is very different from what it was when I started. And so I don't I don't look at someone else that has a different definition of the yoga and say, no, they're wrong because, where I'm in my journey, this is what it is. If I look at that people that have been doing this practice much longer than me, like my teachers, they're going to have a little bit of a different definition of it. And that's okay, because we only have our experience and nothing else.
And what was like the biggest realization in your life, after looking into philosophies and all these teachings and figuring things out by experience? If you would have to come up with like the biggest thing to share with everyone, like, meaning of life or some kind of approach to how you live, what would be like the one thing?
Wow, to say just one thing, because since I
Or maybe, the
yeah,
main area.
since I started on this yoga journey, I've had so many realizations, and I think like what I just talked about of yoga being the whole is the big one, because everything else falls down underneath that, or at least in yoga, there's this word. It's called Maya, and Maya means illusion, or yeah, a a better way. My teacher Shiva Das, he says Maya is it's things appearing real but not as they are. Right. So like if a magician does a magic trick, you see that trick and you go, oh, okay, that it looks real, it fools us. And the ultimate Maya is that we are separate because we're the ones looking. And this makes us think that I'm different than you, because how can we be the same if we're both looking? And this is one of the concepts that I think is the hardest for people to really grasp and understand, because we can only have a subjective experience. We can only have a reality that is our own. What yoga has really taught me is that I need to look beyond my own experience to the objective truth. That is what is really happening beyond my personal reality. And that helps me understand what other people do, what they feel, why they do what they do, and also helps me understand what I'm feeling and what I'm doing, and not to be so centered on my emotions or controlled by my emotions. Um, emotions are vrittis, or they're modifications of reality. So we look at the things that change what the truth is. So one way that truth has been described is like a reflecting pool, that we look into the pool and we see the truth reflected. But anytime that there's any ripples or any changes or debris or dust or whatever that's in that, it creates a slight distortion of what reality is. And really the only thing that distorts the pool is ourselves. And when you realize that you are always distorting the pool, that you're always creating a reality that is not the true reality, which this is also another concept that's really hard to understand, because your reality that you experience is the true reality, but it's only true to you and to no one else. But if it's only true to you and no one else, how can it be true? Right? Reality, truth is true to everybody and what everybody is experiencing. So I think we learn that none of us are really truly experiencing the true reality, and that will always be that way. But at least with that understanding, we can move beyond ourselves as being the center of the universe, the center of importance, and we could actually see beyond that. And I think so much of what's going on in the world today, and politically, and even like with it's just there's so many people that are so self-centered, especially in my country, and I see it all over with like the simple things of wearing a mask. Right? People go, well, I don't need to wear a mask because I don't care about catching COVID or whatever it is that they don't see. It's like, okay, well, we wear it to protect other people because the focus is just on themselves. And that's kind of a really small, maybe even a bad example of that. But this idea of we create the distortions in our reality. And even with that, when we're still looking in that reflecting pool, that we are still only seeing the reflection of the truth, even when we remove all distortions, all emotions, all the things. In yoga, we call these the kleshas, the ignorance, fear of death, the avesha, the vinavesha, raga, all these things that basically create suffering in our lives. But even when we remove all that, we still need to look up to see reality, which is impossible because we're the ones looking. And in yoga, like, you talk about moving through the stages towards enlightenment as we move up, and we can never actually truly remove ourselves from ego, because when we do, we can't be aware that we're without ego, because there's always, as soon as you do, you are aware of the ego. Anyways, it's this whole thing is, it's more, I think in the beginning I got really confused, as I'm sure a lot of people listening to this feel really confused about it, because I'm trying to explain years and years of studying philosophies in a short little time. But I think what's most important for everything, whether it's the philosophy, whether it's movement, whether it's breath work or meditation, is to understand that these are all tools or maps. And a map is designed to get you from one place to the other. And when you understand how to navigate that map, then you're able to move in that direction. But the map is not real. The map is just a representation of what is real. And depending on how you need to move or what you need, you choose the map that is appropriate for you. Philosophy is just a map. It's just a map that helps you. It's not real. It's just a representation of what is real, but it helps you move into the direction to get you to the point that you need to go.
Hey guys, Mike here. Just a quick note. As some of you know, currently on the web there are some serious attempts to censor the information that do not fit the mainstream narrative. And we at Truth Theory have experienced that firsthand. We have been shadow banned, we have been demonetized, we even lost some of our accounts. So now more than ever, we need support from our followers and people like you. So we accept donations. If you want to help us out, just go to truththeory.com/donate, and anything helps. We also accept cryptocurrencies, and we've been creating free content for the last 10 years, and our goal was always to just expand consciousness of humanity and raise awareness about the important things. But it's becoming increasingly harder to do so. So any support helps, and thanks a lot for supporting us. And if you cannot help financially, that's not a problem. Maybe you can share our content on social media, share it with your friends. That always helps. And we are on all major platforms, so make sure you subscribe as well. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. Just search for Truth Theory or Truth Theory Podcast, and make sure you follow us or subscribe. And again, if you want to support us, just go to truththeory.com/donate. And now back to the show. And you often mention that the only real thing is the present moment, and everything else is kind of an illusion. Can you elaborate on that? Because a lot of people don't have that realization that, we're constantly thinking about the future or the past, and this is not really benefiting us. Maybe you can talk a little bit about this whole concept of being present and how yoga helps you to be present.
Okay. Well, I don't know if the thinking about the future or the past is not beneficial. I think in some instances it is beneficial. It's definitely beneficial to think about the future, but in what you're saying, the future is not real. It's only a concept. And the past also is not real. It's only a concept. And we know it's not real because we can't go there. I've been in the past, but I was in the past in the present moment. And I'll go to the future, but I'll go to the future in the present moment. This world is if we talk about what truth is, and yoga uses the word sat for truth. The sat's the Sanskrit word for truth, which means that which is not changing. And if the universal truth is everything is changing, then how can not change be truth? And ultimately, what it comes down to is everything that changes in this moment, in the present moment. And everything that we experience happens in this present moment. And everything that we had experienced happens here. Everything that we will experience happens here. And so we need to live our lives here. That doesn't mean that here is not going to be in the future at some time. We need to prepare for that. But if I am living my life in the past, if I'm living my life in my memories of what things were, that's not helpful to me. Doesn't mean I shouldn't learn from my past. Of course I should. And if I'm not thinking about the future, then I'm probably going to be pretty unprepared for the future. But if all my goals and all my aspirations, everything that I want to do happens in the future, then it's never going to happen because I'm only going to live in the present. I prepare myself for the future by doing my best for today, which is what I'm always going to experience. It's also why I've changed most of my goals. I have a direction, but I don't have a destination because my destination is always going to be here. So that means, well, what can I do here? I can only do my best. Whatever that is, if I do my best, it's going to set me up for growth towards the future. And if I don't do my best, then that's going to put me somewhere else. But I can't go back and change the fact that I didn't do my best. And so there's no reason to go back and be like, oh, you didn't do this or you didn't do that and get down on yourself. Or I'm eventually going to be this or that, because then you're never going to be satisfied. There's two philosophies in yoga. One is called santosha and the other one is called tapas. And like most of the yamas and the niyamas, or the yoga it's kind of like the 10 commandments of yoga, how we should live our life. I really try to daily live my life by all of them, but really these two in particular. Santosha is contentment, which means like wherever I'm at, I need to be happy with that. And this goes into a lot of deeper philosophies or understandings of my perception and my perspective. So my perception of how I'm seeing things. Am I seeing things, or my perception and perspective? Yeah, same thing. But am I seeing things as myself, or am I seeing things for how they truly are? And the other one is preferences. Am I happy with how things are? And the only way that I could be happy or not is if I decide what I like and what I dislike. If we decide we dislike more things, we're going to have a lot harder time to be happy. If I let go of those things and accept things for how they are in the present, because you can't change the present moment. Just you can only work in that, and change happens through that. But if I'm able to decide on what I find is enjoyable or not enjoyable, I'm going to have a much happier life. And so this all brings me down to being content with where I'm at. But if I'm just content with where I'm at, I might stop growing. I might never change or whatever, and then I'll gradually decline and mentally decline and physically decline towards death, because we're ultimately all going towards that ultimate truth of we're going to die. But I'm not ready to go there just yet. I want to continue to grow, and the growth comes through the tapas. And tapas is our inner fire, our inner desire, the drive that allows us to do our best. So if I'm happy with who I am in this moment, and at the same time, I continue to do my best, I'm going to continue to grow, and my life is going to be fruitful, and I'm going to feel fulfilled. And the things that I would normally set as goals in the future will happen. But instead of me waiting for those goals to happen to make me happy, I could be happy now.
Yeah. It's all about perception, and you cannot influence what happens to you, but you can decide on how you react to what's happening to you, right? Um, and you mentioned that when you were a firefighter and you lost your job, at that time it felt like the saddest thing. You had a mortgage and all these things, but if you look at it now, you know, because of what happened, you decided to become a yoga teacher, right? So in a way, it was a blessing. Would you say that? Because we often, something happens to us, and in the given moment, it seems like, that's the worst thing ever. But you look a few years from now, and it was actually for a reason, maybe to step into something new. Do you look at it now this way?
There's an old Buddhist story about a farmer and his son, and his son, or here's this farmer, and he finds this wild stallion, and all the other farmers are like, oh wow, what great luck that you have, that this beautiful wild stallion came to you. You're so blessed. And the farmer goes, maybe I am, maybe I'm not. And then a few weeks later, the farmer's son was trying to break the horse, trying to tame the horse. And in doing so, the son fell off and broke his leg and could no longer help the farmer do all the duties. And all the people around said to the farmer, oh, what bad luck that you have. It is so unfortunate that you got this horse that broke your son's leg, and now you have to do all this work by yourself. And the farmer goes, maybe yes, maybe no, no one knows. And then a few weeks later, a big war breaks out, and all the young men have to go out and fight in this war. But the farmer's son couldn't go out and fight because he had a broken leg, and all the men around said, "Oh, you're so lucky that your son broke his leg, so now he can't go out and fight this war." And the moral to the story is we never know what the outcome of a situation is going to be, and sometimes it's okay, like when we have something that's tragic to us, to have sorrow, to feel sad, to mourn or grieve or whatever. But it doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. And that definitely, I worked the majority of my life to get, like, my dream job was to be a firefighter paramedic. And when I was 28 years old, or 28 years old or so, I became a firefighter paramedic, bought a house, did all these things, all the goals that I had, I was checking them off. And so I accomplished everything that I thought I would set out to, and 28 years old. And then when I lost my job, then it was like, okay, well, with that, I also couldn't afford my mortgage and had to move, and my dream of being this firefighter, all that stuff went away. And it's so easy to be like, that was such a tragedy, but we never know what's going to come. And that happening was the greatest blessing that could have happened. But it also could have been the worst thing that could have happened. And this is really where it's up to us to decide. We stress or tragedy or whatever that is, those are always opportunities for us to grow. Without those things, we don't grow. When we're comfortable, when everything is good and everything is happy, we become stagnant. And that's where we stop either our physical, mental, or spiritual growth in those places. It's interesting, like, being comfortable and happy is one of the worst things that could happen to you, unless you understand that you need to continue to challenge yourself and continue to grow. But also in that every time tragedy strikes you or anything like that, and you are able to breathe another day from it, it is an opportunity to become a better person, and it's an opportunity to help other people through your experience. And so I was very lucky. I was very fortunate that losing my job let me have the opportunities that I have to be able to travel the world and to do something as simple as just teaching yoga. But for me, it really has fulfilled me. It's really been an amazing journey, and one that I feel super fortunate for.
Yeah, sometimes I feel like almost the universe pushes you towards a specific direction by, doing rearranging things for you in a way, and you just, whatever comes, you just surrender yourself, and then actually something greater can come out of it. What's yeah, sorry.
I was going to say, I think the universe does that, but it does it in a way that's not for for most of us. That's not so obvious. It usually gives us a choice of one way to go or the other, and one way is into resistance, and the other way is into flow, like up the river or down the river. And so, if we when we're listening, we're able to understand that way a little bit better. But when we are so consumed with ourselves, when we're so into our own subjective experience, that we tend to choose the wrong way. And I think this is why it's important to be able to step outside of yourself and to see the truth for how things are really happening.
Yeah. Would you consider yourself to be a spiritual person? What's your definition of spirituality, and do you believe in things like spirit, soul, reincarnation, these kind of subjects?
I definitely consider myself a very spiritual person. Spirituality is a word like any other word, so we all have our own definition of it. For me, my definition of spirituality is the quest to understand the truth. And I think the truth, as I've mentioned quite a few times, is that we're whole. All of us are whole. We came into this world whole, without needing anything, without lacking anything, and we'll leave it going back to the whole. Uh, as far as spirit or soul, a big part of that is, I don't know. And we can only, all of us, I mean, if we knew, there wouldn't be beliefs, there wouldn't be faith, there wouldn't be all these things. Faith or belief is by definition not knowing. So that for a lot of that is, I don't know. I have ideas. I have my thoughts for it, but I'm also open to changing that as I grow. And I think that's also an important thing with belief and faith, is that when you allow yourself to grow in your beliefs. I believe that we are all energy, that there is a universal energy, and we could call that universal energy source. But I don't believe that energy has an ego. And as we transcend this, as we move into this life, we're all vessels, containers to hold source or to hold energy. And with that energy manifests as something, and it manifests as yourself, as your ego, just like as energy moves into a light bulb, and as it ignites, as it moves through the filaments, the light bulb glows. And as that energy is in the light bulb, it takes the shape of the light bulb. It takes the personality of the light bulb, whatever color it is, however bright it is, those things. But that is finite. Even though the energy is infinite, the light bulb is finite. And eventually the energy will go from the light bulb and continue on back to the source to reignite something with that. But as it leaves that, it will not take any of the identity with it. And that's kind of how I feel. I am this vessel, this body here is animated by source, by energy. And when I die, then that energy will go back to it. But with it, my ego, my memories, and all that stuff won't. We really are our memories and nothing more than that. If you were to take everything away, if you got hit in the head and all your memories, everything that you knew was gone, and you started out from like zero, like a brand new born baby, what of you would be left? Even though you would still be living, you would still have breath, you would still have these things, but you essentially would not exist. And if that happened to everybody, then everybody would just start out from scratch. And that's kind of what I feel like death is. It's, as Alan Watts says, we don't remember. We have no experience of who we were before we enter this body, before the first time we wake up, and it'll be the same after. It'll just, life is an experience and death is a non-experience. And we only know experience. And so there's this fear of non-experience, but it's there's no suffering in non-experience. There's no pain. There's no joy. There's just non-experience. It's not even nothing, because nothing is an experience. And I think we are scared of nothingness, but death is not nothing. So yeah, anyways, that's where I am right now. It might change. I don't, reincarnation could maybe, or, I essentially, like, by my definition, it is reincarnation, but with it, nothing that is individual goes along as I leave this body.
What about karma? Concepts like karma. Do you believe in karma?
I believe in what you do every action has a result. So we create our own karma. I don't believe in past life karma. I don't believe that there was a former version of Dylan that was good or bad, and that's why my life is good or bad at all. But I believe that my life, as who I am and how I've been living, what I've done, definitely creates what happens to me. And I think we should all believe in that.
And, looking at the situation on the planet, obviously, we're facing so many challenges, environmental, and, what would you say people could change about themselves so it could create a positive impact on the world? If like people would start doing one thing, for example, having some kind of approach or the way, they think, that it would actually change the whole world, what would you advise people to do, or live, how to live?
Think less about yourself, and that's it. Actually, think about other people. I what was that? I just watched last night the documentary with David Attenborough. I don't know if you've seen that yet. It's but
Yeah, I
it's,
watched some of, not sure.
yeah, basically he's talking about his whole life and the world and where the world's going, and he's 93 years old. But we tend to think about what we could take from this world rather than what we can give to this world. And the world is not a resource to be taken from. People are not resources to be taken from. And so if we stop trying to always take and start trying to give, that changes everything. That changes how we live on our planet and what will happen to our planet. If we keep going how we're going, the world is not going to be here for our kids. In 100 years, we won't have a planet. We already see it now. That people think that climate change isn't real, and I don't understand these kinds of things. We've definitely have sped up our fifth or sixth mass global extinction. I think we're heading that way if we don't change some things. So we need to start thinking about those things. If something is not infinitely renewable, then it's not sustainable, and we need to change to a more sustainable way of living. And maybe that means everyone becomes vegetarian or whatever, but we're so consumed with how things affect us or how we feel or what's going on towards us that we forget about the bigger picture. And that's because I understand that, because we are all having this subjective experience. And so we think everything is happening to us rather than everything is happening and we are happening with that. So The simplest way is think about yourself less and think about others more, and make your decision based on others rather than based on yourself. And others, not just others right now, but the future of others, the future generations to come. What are we going to be leaving for them? Because once we leave, that's it for us. But people are going to continue on, and they're going to continue to experience this. And yeah, it would be nice if our children and our grandchildren could have a better world than what we grew up in. And I remember when I was a kid thinking about the future was all about like flying cars and skateboards that hovered, and it was very like Back to the Future too, like this cool stuff.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you remember, there's this old Hanna-Barbera cartoon called The Jetsons. And
Yeah.
yeah, and the Jetsons, they all lived like in the sky because pollution got so bad that they had to build their houses up above the pollution, above the clouds. And I think, as sad as it is, like that's kind of where we're going to go. We're going to destroy the planet so bad that we're going to have to basically modify it, where there is no more nature, there's nothing that is renewable, and we have to use science to continue living. But the way life is, it will not be the way that we experience life. So I don't know. My thought of the future as a child seemed pretty cool. Now the thought of the future seems pretty dark and sad, as the polar ice caps melt and more animals become extinct, and the world, yeah, kind of the world dies. I scuba dive, and I've been scuba diving since I was 18 years old. And I've seen with my own eyes how the reefs have changed and how sea life has diminished. And even places like when I learned how to scuba dive in Panama, and going back there and diving there again recently, it's the life that was there is no longer there. And it's like, I don't know how we could deny these kinds of things. Anyways, I know that's a long thing, but it's seriously important. And it's a really important thing that we need to make drastic changes.
Yeah, no, I think, thanks to the internet and social media, a lot of people become more aware of, what's going on, how things work, because in the past, you don't think how these things work. When you get food to your plate, you're not figuring out the process of how, what's happened there. You buy a cheese and you see a label with happy cow, and you don't even think about it. And even like the names, like steak or hot dog, all these things, they kind of almost change the meaning. And so you don't think about actually where it comes from. And then when people are watching, a documentary about uh, animal farms, they get shocked, like, but this is what did you expect? Like, this is what's happening. So it's the same thing with everything. It's like everyone wants to have a lifestyle like we see in the movies, but there is a price to pay, um, for that. And I think, we can see more and more, thanks to the internet, like people can actually start seeing how these things work, and then it makes them think more, Yeah. I also wanted to ask you about injuries. I've been doing kickboxing, for example, for a couple of years, and I was actually a vice champion of Poland as an amateur, and I would get injuries all the time. Like I had my leg fractured, my wrist fractured. So I'm curious, like, what's your experiences with what you've been doing with yoga? Is it easy to get injuries? Did you have any serious ones? And like, are there any typical things that happen to people?
Yeah, I've had my fair share of injuries, but very rarely have they ever come through yoga. I think I've only had really one injury that was no, I've had two injuries through yoga. The first injury was maybe my first year practicing yoga, and I was trying to go into a pose that I wasn't ready for, and I ended up tearing a hamstring. And it took about 8 months to heal. And the second injury was a shoulder injury, and that happened from getting an assist into Marichiasana D, where I told the teacher, I said, "I'm not ready for this pose," and the teacher said, "Oh, I could put you into it." And yeah, and I should have known better, which was for me was a good learning experience, not only as a student but also as a teacher on how to assist other students into postures. But other than that, most of my injuries come from acro yoga when I practice acro, because you're working with someone else and someone else's balance and you're kind of doing more acrobatic things, or from other sports. But very rarely do I ever get any kind of injuries in yoga. It's mostly because my approach to my practice. I don't have any kind of goal orientated practice or destination practice, and especially with flexibility, looking at the science, we know that we get the max amount of benefit through stretching through 80% of the stress rather than 100%. There's no more benefit. So it's really taught me to back off in stretching, and I still see the same kind of changes and improvements. And I'm quite a flexible person, and I'm not naturally a flexible person. And so just understanding the science more to it has helped me with my approach to everything, and also creating balance, not doing so many slow types of stretching, but adding a lot more dynamic movement into it to help strengthen into the joints and work into the properties of fast viscoelasticity. So yeah, yoga tends to be always about healing the body, where I break my body doing other things like surfing or rock climbing, or where I'm really just pushing myself too hard, because I do have a tendency to push myself really hard, because that's just my personality. And so I'm always looking to do my best, or to go my hardest. So anytime you do that, anytime you push the limits, you're going to see injuries. But I try to keep that mentality as much out of my asana practice as possible.
You know, when I was doing martial arts, I could do a side split, I mean front splits, but I couldn't do a side split, even though, you know, when I trained for years. So I'm thinking, is it genetics, or anyone can get to that level if they just put enough of effort into it? Because obviously we have predispositions, you know.
There's always going to be anatomical limitations to every posture, and the body will not go there if it doesn't want to go there. And if you try to force it, it's not going to happen. And there's nothing that says that we should be able to do what somebody else should be able to do. If we look at how different we look on the outside, we look even more different on the inside. And so little things like the length of the neck of the femur, or the angle of the neck of the femur, where the acetabulum or the hip joint and the greater trochanter are, is going to cause limitations. For back bends, it might be how much space you have in the intervertebral disc, or how long the spinous processes are. There's lots and lots of factors that are going to create limitation in the body. And the hip is one of those joints that it's designed for stability. It's not really designed for the mobility that we're trying to get out of it. And so, yeah, there's going to be those limitations, and you might have the type of hip that will never ever allow you to do a full middle split, or a full what's in yoga it's called Samokonasana. Like for me, it's the same. I have a really hard time with the Samokonasana, with the middle split, but the Hanumanasana, the front and back split, I've been able to get into after long periods of time. But if you feel like I said, you get the most benefit at 80% of the stretch, and really you get the science of stretching is really interesting. And there's a lot of studies, a lot of case studies out there, and it's really easy to find. Just don't go to some place like Yoga Journal. Actually, go to like medical science places. Use Google Scholar. It's a great search engine if you're looking for scholarly reports where you actually have scientific peer-reviewed studies. But in those studies, it shows that if we are stretching, we get maximum benefit up to a minute of stretching and not much more after that. And if we to stretch each muscle group 6 times a week for a minimum of 5 minutes a week, maximum of 10 minutes per week, which is much, much less than people think. And where we end up with injuries is when we push beyond those limits, and we keep doing that. But if you just stretch into one area every single day for 1 minute, for 6 minutes a day, you're not. We have a recovery arc, which works through degradation and synergy, or not degradation and synthesis. So when we stretch something, we move in, or work out or anything like this. This is this degradation synthesis arc. We break the body down and then it builds. Well, the more that we break the body down, the more time that it actually has to come back up to our starting point or homeostasis level, and then move into synthesis, into growth. If we go way deep down into degradation and then we try to do that again, our chances for injury are a lot greater, and the chances for growth are a lot less without that type of recovery. So this is where the science says, like, stretch less, but stretch more often, and you'll see a greater response. And like going through lockdown, I was really, really regular with my stretching practice, but I kept it really short and just working into like the same groups every day. And I saw more growth and more change through that short little time than I did when I was holding, the forward folds for 3 minutes or whatever. So yeah, there's with when it comes to stretching, like, less is more through it. Work into it. If you feel limitations, stop there. But if you feel like you're growing from it, continue doing what you're doing. Like, ultimately, it doesn't matter what the science says. Your body is the best teacher, because we're all different. We're all going to respond a little bit different. So yoga teaches us to listen to the body and to those things. And if you're like, okay, well, I can't get into this, it's just not working. Well, don't force it, because you're going to end up hurting yourself.
And self-discipline is such an important thing. I can see that you had so much self-discipline, like you would just do practice on your own for 3 hours a day, and when you were a kid you already started working out and on your own. So some people and I had similar approach. I was just wanted to be good at something, where it was like I was actually doing aggressive inline skating as a teenager. So I'd just sit whole day and keep trying one trick on a handrail over and over and over, throughout the whole day to make it better. But, for many people, they struggle with that self-discipline. And it's so important, for anything we want to do in life, make some changes, reach some goals, whatever it is, start a new thing. We need self-discipline. Is there a way for someone to actually improve that? Or, because some people just seem to have it, that thrive, like you, maybe. And for others, it's a struggle. They need, stability. They need teachers. They need a group to encourage them. Like, they cannot do things themselves often. They need a push from someone else. Is there a way to work on that side?
People are habitual. We like to do the same thing over and over, and this is kind of how we are made, like, or programmed, and it allows us to be more efficient through things. And if you want to be disciplined, it's really about creating a new habit. It's it's hard to create a new habit of, let's say, an asana practice that's 3 hours a day, because it's just too much. It's too much all at one time, and you're going to burn out. It's like the same thing with meditation. When I teach meditation, I've heard people say like, oh, 5 minutes of meditation is not going to do anything for you, or a minute of meditation is not going to do anything for you. Just like 5 minutes of working out isn't going to do anything for you. But if you've never done it before, you need to start creating something that is easy for you to handle. And
Yeah.
the best way to do that is just small incremental steps. Start out with, if you have something you're like, okay, I really want to start practicing every day, set that goal to practice every day and do something that is easier for you than what you think. You're like, okay, I know I could do 30 minutes every day. We'll start out with 15 minutes every day. And then if you're desiring more than that, then do more. And eventually you keep adding on, but the consistency and the repetition of that is going to create a habit. And if you have trouble doing that on your own, get into a program, get into something that almost forces you to do that, and don't make excuses for why not to. That's an easy thing to be like, oh, well, I have this coming up, so I can't do that or whatever. Just don't allow yourself excuses. That's why you set out, you create your schedule and around the things that you want to do, and then make excuses not to do the other things, rather than using those other things as excuses not to do what you want to. But that's all I've done. That's how I started my meditation practice, when I really wanted to meditate, but I couldn't do it, and I couldn't start with 30 minutes. So I started with 5 minutes. With pranayama, the same thing. Doing 30 minutes or an hour of pranayama every day was too much for me in the beginning. So I started with 5 minutes. The asana practice, I didn't start with the 3-hour asana practice. I started with just going to classes and doing that every single day. And I didn't even have like a self practice until I really like got into it. And then my self practice really developed because I was going to a fire station where I couldn't take a yoga class, and online training wasn't really like so much of a thing. There was no Alo moves out there for me to like go on and sign into a class. So I started with my own self practice and developed it that way. And yeah, there's if you're not good at pushing yourself or motivating yourself, at least push yourself to go somewhere that someone else motivates you, or go online and do that.
Yeah, no, I agree. Everything is a habit later on. It's like brushing your teeth. You don't think about it anymore. And, once the hardest thing is to start. But once getting used to something, it just becomes more familiar each time and easier to do. And then you can keep expanding with it. Yeah. So how do you see COVID affecting the situation with yoga studios now? Like, you've been traveling as well. Do you think everything is moving online now?
It's up and down. Like I've been in Czech Republic. I was here for a little bit, and then I just went to Portugal to do a little surfing, and now I'm back here. But before I went to Portugal, you're able to do yoga classes, and there wasn't any limitations for it at all. Now it's down to like 9 or 10 people in a room. So definitely taking yoga or any kind of group classes like that is difficult, as it makes sense. There's people with this disease this virus that is killing people, and so slowing that down is an important thing. I'm not scheduling any kind of workshops. I normally would be still right now traveling around or in a different country teaching some workshops, but there's really no point to do that because I don't want to bring together a mass amount of people. So for me moving forward, it'll probably be a lot more smaller groups and working into intensives like that. But at this point, there's almost no point in group classes or anything like that. So it's a good time to work on our self practice and to do online classes or yeah. But it is, I hate to say it is what it is, but and that same thing, that saying, it's we need to accept how things are. And once we accept how things are and we work towards the ways of changing it, then we could actually change what is happening. And we know the ways to slow down COVID through social distancing, which I really dislike, that social distancing. Like, I think we should change that phrase from social distancing to physically distancing, because we shouldn't be socially distant. It's important for us to socially come together, but physically distance each other, distance from each other. So through physical distancing and wearing masks and disinfecting and all these things, and not putting ourselves in situations of high risk, and not putting others in situations of high risk, and doing whatever we can to slow this down until we get a vaccine and we could go back to normal, because our lives will return to normal. And it's something, if we look at the Spanish flu, the 1918 Spanish flu, look at pictures, people were wearing masks back then, and there was social or physical distancing going on back then, and also people resistant to wearing masks and all this stuff. But eventually that all went away and life returned back to normal. And I think in life will eventually go back to normal, and this will be a memory of the past. So yeah, the more that we try to resist it, I think the harder it's going to be, and the longer that we're going to be in this.
Yeah. Is there anything else you would like to share with the audience?
Uh, I mean, this is like shameless self promotion, but I did just write a book on breathing called the Illuminated Breath. It's available for pre order on Amazon now. I wrote it through lockdown, so it talks all about how breathing changes our lives and how to properly breathe, and it moves through the physiology of breathing, both anatomically and also on more of the energetic level. I mean, I talk about the book really works to find the correlations between the maybe what we would think is like the spiritual side of breathing, or the energetic side of how breathing affects us in yoga and pranayama. Because with pranayama, it works to affect the gunas and the nadis and the vayus, which are all just different maps or so of how energy moves throughout the body, and how this is actually correlated with the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, and also into the polyvagal theory, which is just a whole nother thing to talk about, but how these different systems of balance work together and how we could actually affect them through the breath. And when we understand how the breath works to affect these systems, both physically and emotionally, we could start to use the breath as a tool to change our lives. And through the book, I give lots of different practices on how to increase athletic performance, how to decrease stress, how to help yourself sleep better, how to increase your metabolism. And so there's a lot of that. It's a nice blend of philosophy and physicality through the whole book. So that actually just became available on Amazon for pre-order again. It's called The Illuminated Breath. But yeah, I'm pretty excited for that. It's my first book ever, and it's
Awesome.
yeah. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
other than that. Yeah, I don't know. I'm going to continue just going on doing my thing until things start to get back to normal. So
It's interesting with prana or chi, because it's, as I mentioned, I've been doing qigong, so there was a lot of, I became very sensitive to energies when I was doing my practices. And I think it's such an important area, and it's not getting a lot of attention because, like for example, Chinese talk about how disease starts first on an energetic level and then it manifests into physical body. So, all these practices, and when you breathe, you actually absorb prana through meridians, chakras, and all this kind of stuff. So, I think it's just there is not enough of science or explanation how these things work, and it's just essential part of everything. We focus on physical aspects. Let's say like people talk about Wim Hof breathing or these kind of breathing methods. They talk about hormones and other things, but essentially it's electricity, which is it's absorbing energy as well. And yeah, so also like if you compare, for example, Pilates to yoga, in Pilates there's no focus on breathing, on breath, right? And I feel like this is why it's so much better, because of when you breathe you actually absorb prana, and when you stretch you can kind of energize every other side of the body, right?
I think
So
I think with Pilates, it depends on who your teacher is. Just like with yoga, it depends on who your teacher is. Different teachers emphasize different things, and I know there's plenty of Pilates teachers out there that talk about breath and those kinds of things. Just like there are calisthenic teachers that focus on breathing as well. And yeah, there's actually quite a lot of science that goes into understanding how the energy moves through the body and how the breath affects the body on both an energetic level, on an emotional level. I mean, if we look at the autonomic nervous system and the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system, and we see how these two systems respond to emotions, essentially the feeling of safety or the feeling of danger. And the sympathetic nervous system responds to danger, or at least the perception of danger, which is also something that is emotional. And so we have these physiological responses to something that is energetic, or just the way that someone else makes us feel as they walk into the room stimulates something that is physical, right? That they're someone else's energy. They're just will change us physically, speed up our heart rate, increase our blood pressure, and all the different physiological responses from that. In the same way, like how stress and these things affect us on our relationships, or how they affect us in through intimacy, or all these things. And there is so much science with that, and both yoga and Western science have both created these maps or whatever that show us the effects. What I try to do in the book is actually show the correlations between those, to show how they are actually not different. What the Chinese medicine and the meridians and qi and all that, or the Indian prana and the nadis, versus the autonomic nervous system, or Stephen Porges's polyvagal theory, how it shows how we work through social engagement and how we work through the dorsal vagal complex or the ventral vagal complex, and how these different systems are all correlated. And when we understand that, then we could see how the breath works to change it, because the breath is a tool. If I inhale, that works towards my sympathetic nervous system, and I see that through heart rhythm variability. If I exhale, it works through parasympathetic nervous system, and I again see that through heart rate variability, and those two things change. Inhale creates more sympathetic tone, exhales create more parasympathetic tone. Well, inhale also works into the guna of rajas, which is how things extend and expand, or sattva, which is the balance between those two, or tamas, which is how things decline and contract. And so we see how these systems work energetically to bring balance to the body, and ultimately that's what we're trying to do. And the breath is one of the most effective tools that we have to do that. Of course, the breath is a tool, so it only works so well. So we also have to understand what's going on in our lives. So I address a lot of the philosophical parts with that as well, and then how to use the breath to kind of bring us towards our goals and to bring us into change. So, but yeah, that's there's not a lot of stuff out. There's actually quite a lot of stuff, but it's not a lot of it is put together. And so you have to go to so many different sources. And as I was putting this book together, I had to go to hundreds and hundreds of sources to really get the information to show how these things are linked together, and how the Eastern philosophy and the Western philosophy are one, that there's that the difference, the major difference is really how we are calling it, or the lens that we're looking through.
Yeah, exactly. It's like acupuncture and meridians and the nervous system, right? This is all kind of looking at the same thing from a different angle.
It all goes back to understanding that we are whole, that everything is, when you're whole, one thing changes everything. And when you have that understanding, you're able to use that as a tool.
All right, thank you so much, Dylan, for sharing everything with us. It's really, I learned a lot of stuff as well. And, you definitely inspired me to get more into yoga, because, I liked sports and, movement and all these things, but you get bored with practices over time, and I feel like I want to just start getting a little bit more into yoga, because it's a beautiful practice, and it's like, all-rounded thing. So you're an inspiration for sure. Yeah. All right, guys, thanks a lot for checking out this Truth Theory podcast episode. Until next time. Hey guys, Mike here. Just a quick note. I'm currently offering one-to-one mentoring and coaching through our Patreon page. So as some of you know, I've been interested in personal development for 15 to 17 years. And during this time, I really spent enormous amounts of energy into researching and practicing different techniques. So I'm offering one-to-one video calls through Patreon, and this is really affordable as well. So, some of the things that I can help with are to do with starting an online business, building personal brand, increasing happiness, improving mental and physical health, stress reduction, building confidence and self-esteem, finding your passion, discovering your life purpose, spiritual development and going through spiritual awakening, and many other things. So check it out. It's patreon.com/Truth Theory. It's patreon.com/Truth Theory.